All right, we are live. This has been a frustrating morning. As you all know, we failed multiple times. I was able to get Sarah for most of that interview. We will bring her back. But I am joined, friend of the show, Caleb Maupin. He is a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His book, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in three parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of a changing U.S. political discourse on the geopolitical stage. Caleb, man, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate you joining me. I always enjoy your commentary. You tend to be very insightful when you're giving your commentary on pretty much any subject, whether it's foreign or domestic policy. So when the election happened, my first thought was I would love to have Caleb on to give his own analysis, especially considering you wrote the book on it. So I'm curious, from your take, why did Kamala Harris lose? Why did this country choose Donald Trump? And keep in mind, they call him Hitler, they call him a fascist, they call him a supporter of Nazis, they call him a supporter trash. Donald Trump has been, 99 or 90 criminal indictments. He has been convicted in one. He has been convicted as a sexual abuser. He tried to overthrow the government of the United States. Like all of this stuff is on his resume. And yet he increased his vote share by over 1 million votes. And that just increased his vote share. If you look at Blacks, women, Hispanics, Arabs, all of them went to him in higher numbers than they did back in 2020. The Republican share of Congress, they got the popular vote, the largest popular vote going all the way back to 1928, I believe. Like, it may not be a landslide, but damn it, it's an impressive win. Why, with everything that's on the ledger for Trump, how did he overcome all of that in order to take power in the U.S. Election?
Well, I think that when it really got down to it, what I said in my book, which was published 4 years ago before she was the nominee, and then mysteriously got banned from Amazon the very day she became the nominee for 7 days. What I said was there was a faction among the rich and powerful that had picked Kamala Harris as their person, and they were determined to get her into office, and they would do everything they could to make sure that she became president. And at the same time, I also pointed out that Kamala Harris is not the most charismatic individual, and that the American people had the chance to vote for her in the 2020 presidential primary. They did not. They did not really appreciate her as vice president. She was the least popular vice president in history, according to some assessments. And she never really was loved by the American people. She was loved by the machine that runs the country. And people voted for Donald Trump in repudiation of that machine, which they saw Kamala Harris as the incarnation of. And I think that's how we can interpret the election results.
Basically, the establishment versus the non-establishment in the way that the people see it. And because it's funny, with all of the analysis that's been coming out, that part seems to be missed. Like, meaning they're blaming Blacks, they're blaming Hispanics, they're effectively saying Blacks and Hispanics are misogynistic. They are blaming or spiteful. That's the other part, where they would say, when they deport your family members, don't come talking to us. What they haven't necessarily accommodated is their own fault and their own blame. And this idea that they're running in a campaign, and I agree with you, even when Hillary Clinton ran as I am the establishment. And Kamala Harris is like, I am the continuation of the establishment, basically continuity on the inside, change on the outside. And the public roundly rejected that. I guess from my point of view, they're looking at the public as being, okay, well, the public is misinformed. The public is incompetent. Well, how could anybody vote for a sexual abuser? Like, what are they missing in this? Because you have some people who say Kamala Harris ran a perfect campaign, and I think those people are out of their minds. Do they really believe that, or is that a blind spot in regards to the way the Democratic Party ran this race?
Well, I don't know. If you watched Trump's rally at Madison Square Garden, which I watched online, I was actually outside of Madison Square Garden. I was noted in the New Yorker. We had a big banner that said, "Only peace can make America great again," with Trump and Kim shaking hands. They quoted me in the New Yorker talking about Kamala Harris outside of there with the big banner. But if you paid attention to that rally, one of the speakers was Dr. Phil. And Dr. Phil spoke at the rally and gave his endorsement to Donald Trump. And his whole speech wasn't really about politics. It was about cancel culture and bullying and the way not Trump, but Trump's supporters have been harassed, have lost family members, have lost their business, have lost their jobs for their political stance, and how that's wrong. And that was his whole speech. It was really just all about how he was supporting Trump because he sees Trump supporters being victims of bullying and cancel culture, and that's wrong. And that was his whole speech. And that shows you how, it is kind of something in the American culture. We like the underdog. And when Donald Trump got shot in the ear, I joked that he should have changed his campaign theme song to the William Tell overture, right? Because that's William Tell. He shoots the apple off the top of the kid's head, right? I mean, and it was very close. I think that at that point, the election was won for Trump because the American people, we want to vote for the underdog. We want to vote for the little guy who stands up to the establishment. And Donald Trump looked like that throughout his campaign. Kamala Harris was effectively president, and everyone knew it. I mean, Joe Biden was not running the country. And so everything that she said she could do, it was like, why didn't she do it now? Why doesn't she do it now? So she really didn't have much to run on. She couldn't present herself as a champion of the forgotten man. She couldn't present herself as somebody who was going to get in there and change things because she was already in power. Donald Trump was the underdog. They were indicting him. They were smearing him. I will say that towards the end, the media campaign against Trump got stupid. I mean, it was one thing when he was indicted. It was one thing when they had the woman who accused him in the trial and all of that. But towards the end, when they're saying things like, well, Donald Trump had a rally in Madison Square Garden. Guess who also had a rally in Madison Square Garden 80 years ago? The Nazis. I mean, it's like they're reduced to that. Or, when Donald Trump says, Liz Cheney, she's a warmonger, and I'd like to see her, on the front lines. I bet, she'll send other people to war, but she wouldn't do it. I'd like to see her, getting shot at, on the front lines. And they're saying Donald Trump calls for executing Liz Cheney. I mean, they're just getting stupid. I mean, they're just turning it into like a parody of themselves, right? I mean, it was to the point that unless you were already part of like the anti-Donald Trump, fanaticism, you were looking at the media and you're just like, are you serious? Are you serious? I mean, and it was like they were just becoming almost like a caricature of themselves. It was like maybe watching Family Guy or South Park and their impression of what a biased media report might be. So there you go.
Yeah, I saw that, and I remember flipping out when I saw that because look, over the course of the election, I really wanted Trump to hit this thing of we need to stop these wars. We're wasting money on these wars. All of these people are getting killed, and the world is organizing against us. The Democrats didn't bring that up. Like the BRICS summit and everything else, the organization against the dollar, for them, it was completely invisible. Donald Trump did seem to be aware of it. And, he talks to Tucker. And he has a long speech and a long conversation about we need to stop these wars. We've been spending $10 trillion in Iraq and Afghanistan. What do we get out of this? This is wasting money and lives, et cetera. And I'm like, thank you. Finally, you hit this on the head. And they turn that to he wants to execute Liz Cheney. I flipped out over that. It's like you finally get the guy to say something right. And you don't reward him for that. You castigate him for that. And if you think about it, even when Donald Trump went to make peace with North Korea, the media's point of view was, well, he's clearly getting used. This is clearly a bad idea. Kamala Harris turns it into he's sitting and talking to dictators, missing the fact that the American public seemed to be okay with this idea of bringing down hostility. Even when you look at the polling on this stuff and they say, who do you trust on foreign policy? It ended up being Trump. So, he may not have hit it clearly on the head, but he definitely made this argument about, I'm not going to start wars, I'm going to end wars. The cabinet that he's bringing in, though, doesn't seem like it's a cabinet to end wars. It seemed like a cabinet to start wars. How much do you think the $100 million that Miriam Adelson paid him has to do with the people that he's bringing into his cabinet?
Well, I've noticed there's a bit of a consistency. Now, there's rumors about Marco Rubio, but that's not yet confirmed that he really picked Marco Rubio. And that Marco Rubio
is pushing hard against that. She is trying to take that role as State Department.
Yeah, and I think, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK, both of them, they became very prominent voices in Trump's campaign. And both of them are people who have positioned themselves as anti-war voices, but are also pro-Israel, right? And that is, and I think that there's a layer of wealthy people, in Israel and in the United States who are very pro-Israel, but also don't think Russia is a big problem and are concerned with escalation with Russia. People that are close to the Netanyahu wing of Israeli politics. Israel, the politics of Israel have changed a lot in the last couple decades, especially after the fall of the Soviet Union. You had a flow of people from Eastern Europe who tended to be much more right-wing and conservative, but at the same time, a lot of them were Russian-speaking. They have a TV network in Israel that is for Russian language people, Russian language speakers that is sympathetic to Russia. And I think especially when it comes to Tulsi Gabbard, right? Tulsi Gabbard is an active duty member of the U.S. military. And her whole thing is, fighting against Islamic terrorism and extremists, right? She comes out of the post 9/11 activities, and Russia is really good at fighting Islamic terrorism and extremists because they've been dealing with them for a lot longer than we have. I mean, the Chechen separatist groups that were aligned with the Nazis during World War II and all kinds of efforts against them, Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan in the 80s, and they're really, really good at tracking these extremist groups. And let's remember, Russia warned the United States about the Tsarnaev brothers before the Boston bombing. They had detected online what they were up to, and they went to the American government. They said, hey, watch out for these Tsarnaev brothers. They might be planning something. And they didn't listen to them. And we saw what happened with the Boston Marathon bombing. So Russia is really good at tracking those folks, and that there is a layer of people in the Pentagon and in the in the security agencies that are not really concerned with this regime change stuff, bringing down dictators, spreading freedom or whatever. They're more concerned with how can we keep our people safe from terrorism. And then they look at U.S. foreign policy, especially during the time when Hillary Clinton was running the State Department during Barack Obama's first term. And they say, wait a second, we're not fighting the terrorists. We're fighting the enemies of the terrorists. And that doesn't make any sense. And these Russians you're telling us to hate are really good at tracking these terrorists and sharing information about them. And that's why Tulsi Gabbard went and met with the Syrian government. She has a relationship with the Syrian Social Nationalist Party. I think that there is a layer of people within the government that are, and then they're anti-Palestinian, they're pro-Israel because they view Hamas and the Palestinians as terrorists, which I don't agree with, but that's their perspective. And I think that is a layer of the so-called deep state, if you want to call it that would be more anti-war and willing to cooperate with Russia, with the Syrian government, with India in particular. I believe Tulsi Gabbard is very sympathetic to the government of India, and at the same time, they're not thrilled about opposing Russia or opposing these various governments that fight against terrorism around the world. But at the same time, they're not pro-Palestinian. They have a kind of an anti-Islamic bias. I think there's a layer of people like that, and I think that's who Donald Trump's cabinet at this point seems to be. Now, Marco Rubio is not that by any means. So if he ends up being Secretary of State, that would obviously be an outlier. He's just a straight up neocon if there ever was one. But, I'm an older guy. I keep feeling like an old man. I'm only 36, but, I keep feeling like an old man because I remember after 9/11, right? After 9/11, every country that we're now told to hate was supporting the United States. Saddam Hussein in Iraq is like, wow, I've been fighting these al-Qaeda people for years. I support you, America. Gaddafi, you'll remember, even tortured people after 9/11. And he said, hey, I've been dealing with al-Qaeda for years. You want me to torture some people for you? We'll stop them. Bashar Assad was support. And all the countries, Cuba, Russia, all the countries around the world were supporting the United States after 9/11. and saying that we've been dealing with these extremists for years, and now maybe America will realize we should stop funding them and stop, using them to attack our enemies, and stop, fomenting these extremist groups, for our geopolitical ends. And that was the tone that the bulk of the world had after 9/11. And unfortunately, since 9/11, the United States has basically become Al-Qaeda's air force. And instead of fighting Al-Qaeda, we've fought governments that have stood in Al-Qaeda's way. And since, the fall of Saddam Hussein in Iraq, we've gotten ISIS, we've gotten extremists. Since the fall of Gaddafi in Libya, they've gotten stronger. The Syrian civil war, the U.S. government fomented. So, I think there's a lot of people that are within the deep state that can see that's going on, and that we're not getting safer as a result of these regime change wars.
1,000% agree. I guess, but see, there's a contradiction within the context of Donald Trump and the people that he's putting out in, though. There's reporting that Donald Trump wants to pull troops out of Syria, because if you remember, as you pointed out, with the civil war that Obama fomented to overthrow the Syrian government, they decided to keep the oil. Basically, yeah, we couldn't overthrow the government, but we're just going to hunker down right here over top of the oil to deprive the Syrian government of those resources. Same thing with the wheat, right? So it's like our presence there is in order to prevent the reconciliation for Syria. The problem that Trump is going to have, though, is this is not the same world that he left. So the world that Trump left, Iran was isolated. North Korea was, at the very least, calmed down in regards to firing those attacks. You had Saudi Arabia that was at Iran's throat. That's not really the world that we have now. The BRICS nations have brought Saudi Arabia and Iran together. I mean, hell, they're having military exercises together. They are at the conference where they brought Syria back into the fold. And from the standpoint of North Korea has improved its missile capability where it can hit the United States. So if Donald Trump comes in with this notion that they're going to get Iran on behalf of Israel, what does that mean? Like, what does that look like in real terms, considering the way and the tenor of this kind of new world that he's coming into?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. Barack Obama's strategy when it came to the Arab world was to polarize the Sunni countries against the Shia, Islamic Republic of Iran and Iran's allies. And that was the strategy that we saw Barack Obama do. And actually, Trump continued that strategy when he went to Saudi Arabia and spoke of creating an Arab NATO. And when he implemented the Abraham Accords, right, he got a couple of these countries in the Middle East that are Muslim countries that are aligned with Saudi Arabia to recognize Israel on the basis of Israel helping them against Iran. That was the strategy under Trump, under his first term, under Barack Obama's first term. And what we basically saw in the presidency of Joe Biden is that strategy has completely failed. It used to be that, you had Barack Hussein Obama as president of the United States. You had the Muslim countries very divided when it came to Syria, when it came to the Iran nuclear deal, when it came to everything. And now the Muslim world is totally united against Israel. And Iran is positioning itself as has a lot of respect and prestige among the entire Muslim world because they are viewed rightly as the main opponent of Israel. And everyone's looking at what Israel is doing in Gaza and is horrified by it. And Iran is the center of the resistance to that and the center of the opposition. And you have the Iran-aligned Houthi forces in the Middle East that are stopping ships and have, it's a David and Goliath story if there ever was one. These are the poorest people in one of the poorest countries in the world, but yet they're making the world economy scream and challenging Israel. And at this point, I believe they just attacked a U.S. battleship in the last couple days. And you have, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and you have various forces throughout the region. Now, Donald Trump wanting to pull out of Syria. Well, first of all, the U.S. presence in Syria is completely illegal. The internationally recognized Syrian government has not ever given any permission for the U.S. military to be in Syria. So, it's completely illegal. And so then, of course, the Syrian government that is then aligned with Iran and has gotten military support from various Iranian-aligned groups. Every so often, there will be a rocket exchange between U.S. military forces in Syria and Iran-aligned groups. And the way that they portray that in American media is Iran attacked America. And it's like, wait a second, you go into somebody else's country illegally without their permission, And there's another group that is there with the permission of the government, and they exchange rocket fire. I mean, that's and if you go into somebody else's country illegally, you're there without the permission of the internationally recognized government, and somebody who is there with the government's permission, clashes with you. That's not like you're being attacked, like your sovereignty is under threat or something. And what I will say is interesting about this whole conflict, right? And this happened during the Trump administration too. When Trump, was running the White House during his first term, there were many instances where Iranian aligned forces would attack the United States, and then Trump would retaliate. We saw the murder of Qasem Soleimani, which was very much unprovoked. And what you'll notice about that is that these are not situations, in Iraq and in Syria where it's like the governments are directly fighting each other. It's kind of armed groups that are given backing by somebody, and that is the nature of military confrontations in our time. William S. Lind, who was the Pentagon strategist, one of the main authors of the surge in Iraq, he wrote a piece. He talks about the concept of fourth generation warfare and how war is fought by non-state actors in our time. And that's an interesting concept. It's worth exploring, because basically great powers with nuclear weapons, if they fight each other, that spells the end of humanity. So instead, they fight each other via proxies, but these proxies are always kind of loyal to themselves, not the great powers who might be backing them or arming them at the time. They have their own agenda. And so warfare in our time is a much more complex chessboard. You're muted.
Sorry. No, you're absolutely right. And if you think about it, if you think about Syria, talking about these kind of proxy groups, if you think about Ukraine, proxy group, if you think about Taiwan, using, as a battering ram against China. No, you're right. Even in South America, if you're thinking about the kill squads that were going through trying to take down the Sandinista governments, all of these were basically fascists that we were using as a battering ram. And yeah, I agree with you. We've gotten so far in regards to the capability of the weapon systems that if they go one-to-one, the world ends. And so it's almost like they've decided, all right, we can't allow this to get to the point of us fighting nation to nation. However, we can use non-nuclear proxies to do it. With one catch, Israel is a nuclear power. And so, it's like Israel is not a proxy in the context, well, it is, but it's not a proxy in the sense of a band of rebels. It's an actual government that we've armed to the teeth up to the point of having nukes. And so it's like, from their point of view, the Samson option is always on the table if they feel that their existence is at stake. Iran is going to launch True Promise 3, and they're effectively promising, look, we warned you the first time. This is not going to be a warning. We are doing this in order to basically obliterate you and send a message. What do you think? Do you think that is going to go through? Because I get the sense that countries like Russia and China are probably counseling. It's like, look, we're trying to do the economic thing. We're trying to get BRICS going. We don't necessarily want you to be involved in a larger war. Or do you think that conversation is taking place?
Well, I do think that Iran very much depends on the support that it's received from Russia and from China. And so dramatic moves that might spark a regional confrontation are going to be something that they would have to consult with Russia and China about before taking. And I think that Iran has shown amazing restraint compared to the absolute insane, the assassinations on their territory that have taken place. Any country would retaliate, and Iran will retaliate, I'm sure, but they're trying to figure out a way they can retaliate that doesn't spark a regional confrontation, which seems to be what Netanyahu is desperate for at this time. I think there is an interesting parallel because there are now rumors that the confrontation in Gaza may actually end before Trump takes office. And you'll remember that when Barack Obama was set to take office, there was a huge Israeli all-out attack on the Palestinians that went on. And it was timed very carefully so that Barack Obama, whenever he was asked about it, would say, well, there's only one president of the United States. I haven't taken office yet. And so he wouldn't comment on it. And there is some speculation that things may wrap up, before Donald Trump takes office on January 20th. And that would be interesting. And that's been in the Israeli playbook for a long time. So, no, yeah, I mean, there are different theories about what might be going on. I will say that on the one hand, Iran, it's Iran's military, especially the Islamic Revolutionary Guards. They are directly accountable only to the supreme leader, and they are pretty solidly with Russia and China and all of that. But there is a layer within Iran's government that is very, very pro-Western, and the new president of Iran, after the death and the helicopter crash of their President Riazi, the new president has made some odd statements about Russia and Ukraine, and that he very much is kind of pandering to the more pro-U.S. or less anti-imperialist sections of the Iranian society at large, of the private sector, etc. So it's interesting to see that the Islamic Republic has been around since 1979. It's the result of a popular revolution. And you have this very solid apparatus, the Revolutionary Guards, the Basij councils, the supreme leader. But in addition to that, there is a kind of a wider society there, a private sector in the economy, a lot of very wealthy people who fly back and forth between the United States and Iran quite a bit. There's a lot of people who live in Southern California, are quite wealthy, and then fly back to Iran. They've got big houses in Iran. They got big houses in Southern California, and they have a very liberal orientation, and they tend to be quite cynical and negative when it comes to the Islamic Republic. And so Iran is in kind of a weird spot. And it's a society that's being held together. It has a government that comes out of this revolution, but there are a lot of different factors there, and it also has international relationships. I believe Barack Obama's intention was to insert American influence into Iran with the nuclear deal, and set the stage for eventually destabilizing Iran and bringing down the Islamic Republic. And he failed to do that. And the hardliner faction in Iran that is more solidly anti-imperialist, anti-capitalist, they are more solid than ever before, and that's a result of the failure of the Iran nuclear deal.
Yeah, and Joe Biden didn't go back to it either. Yeah, that's pretty wild. Because I've always made this argument that under Joe Biden, America has lost influence in the world. And part of that is because he's went with this kind of maximalist approach. Russia comes out, said they want a security deal or security arrangement, and we say, well, you don't get security arrangements. And all of this basically leads to and provokes this kind of war in Ukraine. And I would say the same thing, though. The war in Ukraine, on some level, has removed Iran and North Korea from this kind of isolated position that they had over those years. The world is fundamentally changed, and Donald Trump is going into a world that is far different than what he left. From your point of view, in regards to Netanyahu, what do you think he's trying to accomplish? Because you made the point of saying, well, he's continuing to escalate. But if you look at Israel, yes, Israel has the ability to kill a lot of people. Fair enough. They're prolific at slaughtering women and children. Winning a war is different, though. Like in Vietnam, the United States could kill a lot of people, but we lost that war. And so it's like they're still bogged down in Gaza. They're still bogged down in southern Lebanon. The bombing campaign of Beirut in order to try to either provoke a civil war or at the very least to get the government to give over the territory, that hasn't worked. If anything, that's unified the country. And now they're escalating to the point of striking Iran, meaning they're having back-to-back strikes. And it's become clear that their Iron Dome is not this infallible system, that Iran has the capability of basically cutting through their system like butter. Knowing this, meaning the moment that you're aware of this, that this larger country can effectively hit you at will and you can't stop them from doing it, this seems like a pathway to destruction, especially when you add in the economy has collapsed, you add in the number of people that have left Israel and may not come back because it's no longer a safe haven. What is the plan here? I mean, is it just greater Israel? Is it Netanyahu staying out of jail? What do you think the ultimate idea is in this? Because I heard it too, that Donald Trump told Netanyahu to get this over with before I get into office. I don't know if that's true or not. But what do you think Netanyahu is after in all of this, all of these moves that don't necessarily seem to be gaining him what he wants? or gaining what he seems to want?
Well, I think there's kind of a go for broke strategy. Go all in or go home. I mean that he needs a regional confrontation. He needs to escalate. He needs the Iranians to be the enemy. He needs Israel to have an existential crisis and feel like its right to exist is in question. And so he's willing to provoke things and push things as far as they possibly can go in order to maintain that. And that the way Netanyahu sees things is it represents what a large sector of the Israeli society thinks, but not the majority by far. And there is a layer of Israeli society that is opposed to him and opposed to the way he's going. And the second that the confrontation stops, there's going to have to be a big argument in Israel about what they want and what their future is. And when that argument happens, Netanyahu is going to lose that argument. He knows that. So the longer that he can prolong this confrontation, the rally around the flag effect, the better. Because when the confrontation ends and when they're just talking about dealing with issues in Israel, he's going to be out of power, and he realizes that. And I think at this point you can look back to what WikiLeaks revealed about the CIA's predictions about Israel, collapsing in the next 50 years. There's not support for it among the wider generations of Jewish folks around the world. There's a trend of people not moving to Israel. I mean, it used to be a really common thing that Jewish people from around the world would just migrate to Israel and live there, and that's not happening. And that, especially now with Israel being so isolated and the bombing of Gaza and all of that, I think Israel is at this point where it has to, figure out if it's a viable project even for the next 50 years. And so Netanyahu's escalation is seen in that context. It's like, we gotta put everything on the table, or else we got to go home.
I know, but no, okay, fair enough. I accept that. They're using October 7th as their 9/11 moment, where the U.S., we're going to reshape the Middle East with American power. In their mind, they're going to reshape the Middle East with American power, basically. But this seems to be, like, I don't know how you go back to October 7th, October 6th. And Israel does not seem to be safer than it was back then. By the same token, it's like you kill 40,000 kids. I don't know how you go back to some kind of normal apartheid state, open air ghetto scenario. Like, that's what I mean when I say, like, I don't know what you're reaching for. I don't know what he's trying to get. I mean, Yemen has been firing missiles in. They're still fighting in Gaza. They're trying to annex the West Bank. That was something that came out the other day with Smotrich basically saying, hey, Trump won. We're going to annex it. We're just going to take it. No pretense. They are still fighting in southern Lebanon. That hasn't necessarily changed. This notion or war aim to be able to bring people back to the north, that doesn't seem to be happening anytime soon. Missiles are still being fired. Like, they seem to be in a far more precarious predicament now than they ever were. Where for the first time, it does seem like their existence is at stake. How do you think this ultimately resolves? I mean, do you see one person, one vote? Do you see some kind of partition? Or do you see them going back, oddly enough, to some kind of normality of an apartheid state, open air ghetto? How do you view the end part to this? Because I got to be honest, I don't know how it ends.
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people have asked me, Caleb, what is the answer? What is the answer to the problem facing the Palestinians, the Israel-Palestine conflict? And I wish I could give a quick answer that would solve things. But ultimately, the world is changing. And Israel came into existence as a result of the British Empire, the Balfour Declaration, and then eventually 1948, the United States, the United Nations setting them up. And that Israel is largely accountable to the Western countries that arm it and support it, et cetera. And in the developing world, Israel is not as popular. And if you go to Africa, you go to Asia, you go to Latin America, there are some exceptions. India tends to be pretty supportive of Israel. But aside from those exceptions, Israel is not very popular around the world. And there is a new economy arising in the world centered around the BRICS countries. And those are countries that are not big fans of Israel. And the West, that are big fans of Israel, their role as dominant forces in the world economy is waning. And ultimately, the future of the Palestinians depends on the rise of multipolarity and the sections of the world that don't have as much influence now gaining them, which they are very, very much. I mean, it's happening. I mean, Africa is the future. Africa is rising. The BRICS countries are getting stronger. The Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Belt and Road Initiative of China, Russia's Eurasian Economic Union. There's this whole new world that's emerging. And as that economic factor, and as that section of the world gets stronger, they will continue to be critical of Israel and put Israel in a position where Israel has to accommodate and deal with them. And that will lead to them having to deal with the Palestinian issue and Israel's ability to not deal with that issue and just rely on support from the West will weaken. And it's a process, and that's not an easy fix, right? Everyone wants an answer right now. That's not an easy fix. It's a process. But as the dynamics of the world change and we move toward a multipolar world, Israel will get weaker and be in a position where it has to start making concessions and compromising, and that will lead ultimately toward probably some kind of Palestinian statehood, and hopefully eventually a situation where everyone living in that area has equal rights to some degree. But I don't think it's going to happen overnight, and it's going to be a gradual process.
We have about 2 minutes. How do you view, let me see, the rise of Trump, the change in the politics in Europe? I mean, for God's sake, Germany has collapsed. The government's collapsed. The French government has fundamentally collapsed with Macron not allowing the actual winners to form a government, and he's putting his own puppet in. But basically, even in the European elections, you could see this kind of trying or this attempt to change the tide, where many of the Greens and many of these, for lack of a better word, batshit crazy Greens got pushed out. And more right-wing parties, some of which were skeptical of the war, ended up in power, especially from Germany's part. Scholz is going to basically lose his job in the next election. How do you see Trump, this shift in Europe, especially as a result of the war and energy, not being able to get energy, in the context of BRICS and these other global South powers that are coming into play, meaning the world is trying to organize with this notion of multipolarity. These guys have not gotten on board, and they are still trying to hold the line with the 14% of the globe represented by the United States. How do you think that's ultimately going to shake out?
Well, I think the new right in Europe, the rise of Trump in the United States, represents there's a division among the rich and powerful in all these countries, and that you have the more powerful faction that is kind of loyal to the World Economic Forum, the European Union, NATO, the kind of international alliances that are about maintaining a global system of dominating the world, imperialism. And then you have a lot of local capitalists who are just like, hey, I just want to make money. I don't care about NATO. I don't care about dominating the world. I don't care about your agenda of spreading human rights. I just want to make money. And they are more interested and invested in the domestic economy of these countries than they are in the kind of global agenda that the ultra rich are focusing on. And, they talk about the rich versus the ultra rich. There's a good book called The Yankee and Cowboy War by Carl Oglesby that kind of examines the Vietnam War era and the assassination of Kennedy and Watergate in light of that division. Carroll Quigley, who was Bill Clinton's mentor, he talked about the Anglo-American establishment and how there's kind of this, the New England old money in the United States tends to be a bit more liberal, and most rich people in the United States tend to be conservative, and there's like a push and pull between them. And that, this is the divide. It is old money versus new money. It is the kind of globally oriented, ultra rich versus the lower levels of capital, the lower level capitalists that just kind of want to make money and are entrepreneurial rather than managerial in their outlook. And that's the division that I think is kind of defining things. The new right represents a lot of wealthy people in Germany who are like, hey, I just want to make money. I just want what's best for Germany. I'm not tied into this global thing. And we could make more money if we traded with Russia because they're right on our border. And the same with the Brexit folks, the same with the Trump folks here in the United States. It's not a perfect lining up. I mean, there's always outliers and different factors, but I view this in that light largely.
That is a great point. That is a really good point. I guess I hadn't thought of it in those terms, but you're absolutely right. This kind of these smaller economies versus these kind of larger economies where they want their bigger share or they want their fair share. I mean, even in the way they talk to each other, it's about we're equals, there's not a hegemon, et cetera, et cetera. Caleb, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate this. I'm sorry for the technical difficulties this morning, but man, I always enjoy you. The audience always loves you. So feel free to come back anytime. Caleb Maupin, he's a speaker, writer, journalist, political analyst, and author. His book, like you said, 4 years ago now, Kamala Harris and the Future of America, an essay in 3 parts, examines the life of Kamala Harris and puts her rise to prominence in the context of changing U.S. political discourse and the geopolitical stage. Caleb, where can people find you? I have it that you're on Twitter at Caleb Maupin. I just want to make sure it stays the
Real
same.
Caleb Maupin.
There we are.
Real Caleb Maupin. And I'm on calebmaupin.net, and my organization is called the Center for Political Innovation, cpiusa.org. So there you go.
Very cool. Man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it. I really enjoyed this conversation. I always enjoy your take on this stuff.
Absolutely. Be in
You
touch.
have a good one. All right. Let's bring in our next guest, Daniel Lazar. Another guest that I've always appreciated, Daniel Lazar. He is independent journalist and author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, and social policy in general. He's written several books, including The Frozen Republic and America's Undeclared War. Daniel, you are the person I wanted to talk to today. How are you doing this morning? You doing all right?
I'm doing just fine. How are you?
I'm doing fine. A little weirded out by some of the choices that are being made by Trump in regards to his team that's around him. Let's start at the beginning. I've been asking everybody the same question on this, and I'm curious about yours, especially about yours. Give me your take on this election, and give me your take also on this notion of why would the American public choose Trump? And I'm asking this, wanted to overthrow the government. He's been prosecuted, or at the very least had 90 indictments hanging over his head. He got prosecuted in what I consider to be a bogus trial in New York, but still got prosecuted in that trial. Nearly shot once, meaning there were 2 assassination attempts on his life. And all things being equal, you get the Democratic Party with a certain amount of hysteria, calling him a Nazi, a fascist, calling these people garbage. I mean, like the level of hysteria that basically took place. And yet he was able to increase his vote share by 1 million votes. Whereas Kamala Harris got like 70 million, 71 million, which is 10 million less than what Joe Biden was able to pull in. How did the Democratic Party collapse? How did Trump win this race? And what does it say about American politics that Trump wins?
Well, it says that American politics are, first of all, totally dysfunctional. I mean, many Americans, if not most, were totally disgusted with the lineup that they were presented with November 5th. So this is kind of a protest vote, but the voters were disgusted with the Biden administration, with his inflationary policies, his pro-war policies, his policies of essentially favoring the rich, even though he denied it. And they were fed up.
Bernie Sanders, I'm sorry to interrupt. Bernie Sanders said he's the most progressive president since FDR. That's what Bernie Sanders said.
And then Sanders turned around and denounced the Democrats for being too favorable to the rich. So which is it? Are they favorable? Are they progressive? Or are they elitist? Sanders sends out a very mixed message. So we don't really know what he thinks. But anyway, I think the people were disgusted with that. They were fed up. They voted for Trump as a protest candidate, and Trump won. The fact that the choices were the only choices Americans were given were Kamala Harris versus Trump is astounding. It just shows how the political system has collapsed, how it's increasingly undemocratic, unrepresentative, and dysfunctional. But in any case, now Trump has clearly hit the ground running. He is putting together the most far-right cabinet in U.S. history. They are some really extraordinary people. For example,
if you want, Mike Waltz.
Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, is so right-wing that he actually calls for the construction of a third temple in Jerusalem on the Wailing Wall site. And I don't know if you know what the significance of
it is. I've been there.
Yeah, but this would essentially be a declaration of war on Islam, because it would essentially wipe out one of Islam's three holiest places, and would bring back a temple that has not existed for nearly 2,000 years, complete with a Jewish priesthood, Jewish sacrifices. I mean, it's just absolutely spooky. And this guy is in charge of the Defense Department. It's extraordinary.
Well, here's him. He's on Fox. This is him on Fox. Just to give a taste, there are plenty of these clips of him saying stuff like this. Well, I'm going to play it.
What's at stake?
What's at stake is repelling an authoritarian who basically is saying, I want the Soviet Union back, I want Ukraine back, I want Kiev back. And then what's at stake is making sure we don't allow it to become an Article 5 larger, broader war than that. So equipping and supplying Ukraine with what it needs faster than we have, and we haven't been doing it. The Biden administration has not been doing it fast enough, so that they can further bog Putin down and push him back. It's going to be long, it's going to be bloody, but I think those are the stakes for the United
States. And for Donald Trump.
That was the old Hegstreth. The new Hegstreth is anti-Zelensky, anti-Kiev, and wants a negotiated settlement that will undoubtedly be unfavorable to the Ukraine. But that's what his boss wants, and that's what Hegstreth wants too.
Well, see, that's the rub, right? Like, is this a situation where Trump is bringing these people in, and these people are going to have to, like, because I always look at it as people of policy. And so if you're putting a neocon in a certain position, I'm assuming that you like that neocon's point of view and you want him to affect policy in the way that he's thinking about it. But that's not the way that guy was thinking. As you pointed out, the new version of himself is like, yeah, we need to get rid of this war. So is this what we may expect from all of these positions? Like, even if he gets a Rubio in, that on certain issues, they are bending to the will of the president. Whereas on the other issues, they bend to the will of the president. So, for example, you may have somebody who's a hawk on Israel and yet a moderate on Russia. Is that what we're looking at? Where these people are effectively, regardless of what their original positions is, regardless of what we heard them say on TV and everything else, they bend to the will of the president. Is that what we're looking at?
Yeah, I mean, I think Trump is a strong leader. And so I think that everyone he's bringing on board will do his bidding first and foremost, either his bidding or Elon Musk's or Don Jr.'s. But in any case, so I think that Hegstreth will carry out the Trump line vis-a-vis the Ukraine, and he's way out there in terms of the ultra right, in terms of his Israel policy, way out there. I mean, he essentially is towing the line of people like Smotrich and Ben Gvir.
That's right.
The outright fascist wing of the Netanyahu government. And I think fascist is not too strong a term for those two guys. I'm not one of these people who flings around the F word at every opportunity. I think it should be used very carefully and very precisely. But I think it really does apply to Smotrich and Ben Gvir. And I think Hegstreth essentially is, echoing their point of view.
But see, everybody that Donald Trump is bringing in his administration is effectively the same way on this issue. Like Miriam Adelson has given Trump $100 million. And it seems that money was spent very well, because it seems like he is falling in line with the Israeli first policy. Right. That is very disconcerting to me. So, yeah, I agree with you on this. And Smotrich.
Yeah, I'm sorry, go on.
Well, I was going to say he's talking about annexing the West Bank at this point. Yeah, the U.S. government is supposed to be an instrument. At least the way I look at it, it's like a tool. It's like a hammer. And in this case, the goal is to organize the productive powers of a society in a certain direction that is beneficial to the public, with the elections being that kind of the capability of changing the tool in order to fit the new times that we're in. It doesn't seem to work at this point. And it used to work. Like there was a time where the governmental apparatus did what it was supposed to do. Maybe not perfect because, it's a leaky bucket. I can't think of the last leader that went to the mat for the American public and that I believe fought for the American interests, with the exception of maybe Sanders, but he was too weak to kind of pull that off. What happened? I'm super curious about that. You followed this, you've written books on this. What is it that we have lost that has disallowed the government to actually produce legitimate, real, tangible outcomes to the benefit of the American public? We seem to have lost something in this.
Well, I don't really buy that theory of losing something or some long lost golden age. I mean, you go back to Franklin D. Roosevelt. I mean, the great liberal hero, right? Franklin Roosevelt presided over a period of absolutely unrestrained racial terror in the South. He wouldn't even pass an anti-lynching bill, a bill that would make it a crime to engage in lynchings. Do you know that lynchings in the Deep South used to be advertised ahead of time? They would actually say, tomorrow there will be a lynching, and the local sheriff, who was usually elected, would essentially open the jail door and say, come on in, boys. Here's your man. Take him out. And then there would be a public torture. Like no other country in the world actually had this, public torture. And FDR failed to oppose that because he was beholden to his Dixiecrat wing. And JFK, another sterling liberal. I mean, not only did he start the war in Vietnam, but he was also very cool, very leery of the civil rights movement. When it was actually at its height, at its most heroic stage, he really adopted a hands-off policy. Yeah. Very cool. So I'm not really sure when this golden age took place.
Okay,
but I certainly agree that the system now is completely corrupt. People have lost sight of any kind of rationale for governance, and we have a guy named Trump who's now, going to enter the White House in a couple of months, 3 months, and he is essentially pursuing a far right agenda. So America will see a carnival of reaction in a few months' time. It's going to be extraordinary. That's what all the information we've gotten so far indicates. I'm not engaging in wild speculation. I'm simply basing myself on the facts as we have them, and that's what they indicate.
Well, I agree with you. There was no golden age. Fair enough. Like there's never this thing to go back to per se. But I would say that during that racist time period, this kind of fascist time period in American history, that went on for decades, centuries even. So, we could put it on FDR, but that went well before FDR and well after FDR. But the government, in the context of the society, worked. Meaning it didn't work for everybody because African Americans were second-class citizens. But from the standpoint of white folks, it was doing the job it was supposed to do adequately. That's not true today. Like the influence that people have on our politics seems to be little to none. And the rich, for the most part, the side with the most cash is the side. 90% of the races are won by the side with the most cash. And so you can see that they cater to money. Even the Democratic Party, that is supposed to be the party that deals with healthcare, insurance, unemployment, ensuring people, when they get old, have a place to stay in, Social Security, these kind of lefty policies. It's like those lefty policies don't work well when you have to beg the rich for money who don't need those policies. That is our political system. And at one point, it seemed to deliver, and at some other point, it seemed to have stopped delivering. Is it just that they got much better? Is it just systems, all systems? There's no perfect system that goes on in perpetuity. That basically every point along the way, at some point, people get so accustomed to using a system that they get much better at the corruption within the context of that system. Whereas in the very beginning, people are feeling it out. There may be this ideological bend towards something because they just started it. But the further away you get from the ideological initial starting phase, the weaker that pull gets. So at first it was, well, yeah, of course the country matters more than party. And then at some point it changes to party is the thing that matters more than anything else. And then you even get to my self-interest matters more than anything else. Is that what we're looking at? Just all systems ultimately decay.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. I think you're right. I think that the America was an industrial powerhouse. It was
Right.
its rise to prominence after the Civil War was absolutely extraordinary. It actually started before the Civil War, but there was then it gained new steam after the Civil War, and its rise to prominence was just amazing. It was one of the most astonishing world events of the late 19th century. And American workers did benefit despite savage union busting, despite savage racism. Black people benefited too. I mean, the Great Migration to the northern cities meant that Black people got jobs in industry. They made decent wages despite all the things that were stacked against them. They made decent wages. They were progressing. They were doing well, actually, in terms of income growth and education and all these other things. And so American workers did benefit, but then essentially what we've seen since the mid 70s, early to mid 70s, is a slow collapse of that capitalist engine, and workers have suffered tremendously across the board, all categories, whites, blacks, Asians, men, women, et cetera. Yeah. Now you could argue as to which group got did worse, did better, et cetera, et cetera. But the point is they all fell back. And so yeah, and the political system itself has been in disarray since the 1990s. I mean, nothing happens on Capitol Hill. It's completely frozen. There's this long-term trench warfare. The rule of the rich is absolutely brazen. I mean, remember this summer when they were when Joe Biden finally bowed out, and then Kamala became the got the anointment. The papers were full about Democratic mega donors.
She got $1 billion.
Yeah, but
in 3 months.
But it was the mega donors who were calling the shots. They were running the show.
Yeah, they got rid of him. They told Joe Biden, "You're not getting any money."
Yeah,
what you get? You have to bow out.
So, I mean, it was the rule of the rich.
I mean, but maybe that's the answer to it. Then you have a capitalistic system that is running in parallel to democratic system, and you create this kind of model where it's incentivized because they inherently they want to maximize their profit. And if I can maximize my profit by sending a job over to China, then I'm going to do that. I can pay that worker $3. I was paying an American $15. Then I can pay political campaigns to allow me to do that in order to get tariffs cut off when that product gets back into the United States. Meaning cash seems to be the thing that's working on two ends. On the political end, to allow certain things to take place and to get various people elected, but also on the other end in order to maximize that profit, which undercuts the interests of America. So it's like policy propels this kind of globalism, whereas by the same token, that globalism undermines our own ability to fund our industries, to pay people decent wages and those type of things. Is that what we're looking at? That it's not necessarily the political system in and of itself that fell apart. It was this kind of predatory capitalistic system that's running in parallel with that system that's corrupting the people in the context of the capitalist and democratic order.
Well, I think they're very closely related phenomena. The democratic system, such as it was, is falling apart, and its decay has allowed the naked rule of money and wealth, and the more democracy disintegrates, the more the Wall Street dictatorship, the capitalist dictatorship, whatever you want to call it, the more obvious it becomes, more obvious and undisguised. I mean, America barely qualifies as democratic. I mean, the electoral system is extremely limited. Only two parties are allowed to take part. You have monstrosities like the U.S. Senate, where Lily White, Wyoming, has the same number of votes as minority California.
Yeah.
Do you know that 54% of the population lives in just 10 states that are outvoted 4-1 by the minority in the other 40? And 82% of racial minorities live in those top 10 states.
Really? That I didn't know.
That is structural racism.
80% of African Americans live in
all racial minorities.
All minorities live in 10 states.
Hispanics, Asians, Black people, American Indians. I mean,
so we're thinking California, New York, big state, basically some of the big states, especially in South Georgia, I would imagine, South Carolina. Wow. Yeah.
But they're outvoted 4-1 by the minority.
Yeah.
So that is what's structural. That is structural racism, and it's devastating. But it's not, but it's devastating for white people too. This is a really important thing because white people need democracy. The working class does, irrespective of race, and they're not getting it. And so instead, they're getting the naked rule of the rich. And it's devastating. And with Trump, that rule is even more naked, if such a thing is possible, than it was before.
Is an American political system collapsing under itself? Meaning, is either the American empire or the American political system in general? Do you see it, like you say, you call it decaying? Is decaying not strong enough, especially given the selection? I mean, Joe Biden was out of his mind. And all of these people came up saying, no, he's great. He's awesome. Behind the scenes in those meetings, Joe Biden is just on it. Joe Biden couldn't even be prosecuted because they didn't say he was in his right mind. Like, that guy has his finger on the nuclear button. If that is not an allegory for this kind of decay, I don't know what is.
And when that prosecutor said that, every Democrat in Washington jumped down his throat and accused him of lying. Well,
it's like, how dare you say that about the president?
Precisely. And then came that first debate in July. And suddenly, two things were clear. One is that Joe Biden was absolutely incompetent. And the other was that every other Democrat was lying through his teeth or her teeth. So it was a gigantic cover-up, and Kamala Harris was in the thick of it. Yeah. And so she paid the price.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the prices.
American people don't like being lied to. They get upset, and when they get upset, they take it out in the polling booth.
Do you think she had a chance? I mean, Joanne Reed and some of these other Democrats are trying to act like, oh, she ran the best campaign she could run. People were just racist and sexist, and Hispanic men were just misogynistic, and Black folks weren't loyal, and blah, 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 blah. We were blameless and perfect. It was America that's the problem.
Yes, I think it is the job of wealthy white liberals to tell Black Americans how to vote. Because they obviously can't figure it out themselves. So they have got to rely on white limousine liberals to explain it for them. Yes,
Yeah.
that's what I think the lesson of the election is.
Yeah, fair enough. I said white liberals to explain it for him. How? Let me ask you this: how, if you, and this could be the last question. We have about 2 or 3 minutes left. If you were on the campaign trail with Harris, and you had the ability to be, you heard Elon Musk, you were Harris's Elon Musk, like the way Elon Musk is Trump. What do you advise her to try to win that race?
I would advise her to get rid of the celebrities.
Well, she had Queen Latifah. Queen Latifah was there. Queen Latifah endorsed her, according to Joanne Reed.
I would get rid of I would have gotten rid of the celebrities. I would have, rolled.
And by the way, she paid $20 million for that, for Katy Perry, for Queen Latifah, for what's the other one? Like all of those musical acts.
Oprah charged $1 million.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, the mind reels. But no, I would have gotten rid of all the celebrities. I would have rolled my sleeves up. I would have gone into the neighborhoods. I would have told people that, we've done a lot of things that were wrong. Yeah, we did the best we could, but yeah, we made serious mistakes. Yeah, we're listening to you. Inflation's a huge problem. These wars are out of control. We've got to somehow reestablish some kind of sanity in both the Ukraine and the Middle East. But she just couldn't do that for any number of reasons, one of which she was part of the mistakes when they were being made.
Agreed.
And the other thing is that she just doesn't have very much upstairs. I'm just sorry. I mean, she is not the sharpest tool in the shed. She just is unfamiliar with policy, not comfortable with policy, has very little political success. Unfortunately, she wound up, replicating the campaign she ran in 2019. She did so badly in the 2020 presidential primaries that she had to drop out in 2019.
Yeah.
And essentially, her performance was not much better.
Yeah, she didn't even make it to Iowa.
Yeah.
In those primaries, effectively ran out of money, which is somewhat ironic, considering in this case she owes $20 million after raising $1 billion. And I would imagine people are looking like, how did you spend $1 billion and lose? Donald Trump only raised $390 million. So they raised almost 3 times as much as Trump, and yet lost. Like, just astonishing. It's mind blowing. Like I said, the mind reels over that stuff. Daniel, man, I always enjoy talking to you, Daniel. Anytime you want to come on, you're more than welcome. Daniel Lazar, he's an independent journalist and author, best known as a critic of the U.S. Constitution, American politics, government, and social policy in general. He's written several books, including The Frozen Republic and America's Undeclared War. Daniel, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, guys, I am going to take a quick break. I'm going to be back with Daniel McAdams, another Daniel, and we are going to talk about Donald Trump's picks, basically goblins, swamp monsters that he has filled his coffers with. We'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the Jamal Thomas Morning Show. My name is Jamal Thomas. I am the host of your show. If you guys have been digging this content, give it a like, share it, subscribe to it. We're trying to hit 40,000 by the end of the year. I know we can do it. I believe. I need you to believe also and hit that subscribe button. Also, I want to thank all of you who are here, whatever you're doing this morning. I want to thank you for listening to this voice in your ear. I am here Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, and I would love it if you join me. I want to bring in our guests. Oh, by the way, if you really find that you dig this content, give it a like, share it, subscribe to it. You can also support through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. All chats or stickers will be read, providing they're not racist, sexist, or bigoted. Even if you take the piss out of me, I will read it. And I am joined by a great friend of the show, Daniel McAdams. Daniel McAdams is executive director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. Daniel, welcome to the show, man. How you doing this morning?
Good morning, Jamal. How are you?
I am doing great, better that you are with me. Let's start off at the very beginning. I've asked this question to pretty much everybody. What do you think about the results of this election? And why do you think it turned out this way?
The results of the election, well, I think there are a few obvious things. One is the Harris administration's position on the Middle East. I mean, if you look in places where this is a good metric, I would say, because if you remember in the primaries, when Joe Biden went to certain states, Michigan, I think being one of them, and a few others in that area, there were a bunch of no votes, the NVs, the people that refused to endorse him. And they did it as a protest against the Middle East policy of his administration. And now, if you go back and look at Kamala Harris and how she did in those areas, she lost by that margin of no votes. I saw a chart. I don't have it in front of me, but I think that's one good metric. They were just simply powerless to stop the genocide in Gaza and the killing in Lebanon. I think that was a huge factor. And also the campaign of Kamala Harris was atrocious. And she may be a nice person, but she was a terrible candidate. So I think all of that and people's just sort of general fatigue with this administration led them to go in big numbers for Donald Trump.
Yeah, I agree with you. When you're looking at, like, for example, when you're looking at the exit polling, well, there are a few things in exit polling that's pretty fascinating. For one, Kamala Harris got 10 million less votes than Joe Biden. There's that. Trump increases margins by 1 million votes. There's that. He increases margins among African Americans, Hispanics, Arabs, white women. Like across the board, he basically increased his margins to rather astonishing degrees. I mean, there was the belief that Republicans were mathematically disallowed from winning the popular vote because of the various demographics that typically vote Democrat. He knocked that out the water, that particular model. So look, I agree with you. Democrats are somewhat bewildered by this. What do you think they are going to do going forward? I want to get into the people that Donald Trump is choosing, but I'm curious about where do you think the Democratic Party goes from here? I mean, they ran on a pro-war transatlantic gang going after pro-Israel genocide, and yet they're attacking progressives, despite the fact they didn't run a progressive campaign. She ran around the country with Liz Cheney as if this is going to somehow A, inspire her base, and B, get disaffected Republicans, which didn't seem to be that many considering the degree to which Liz Cheney got beat in her own race. Like, this strategy just seemed to be dead on arrival, and yet none of them could see it. Where do you think they go from here?
I don't know where they go because, as you point out, they ran as the pro-war party. No, the pro-war party never wins. The pro-peace party wins even if they're lying through their teeth. That's one thing. And I mean, the Democratic Party of my grandparents. I'm talking about Depression era Democratic Party. They were for the working man. Now, we may not have agreed with everything that they espoused at the time, but they were clearly for the working man. The Democratic Party today despises the working man. They're for special interests. They're for the rights of very fringe types of people. They're not for, you can't have this kind of inflation, this kind of economy, and profess to be caring about the working man. And for better or worse, Trump is a better campaigner when it comes to this. He connects with working people extremely well. He ran a smart campaign in that he brought in people, bringing in, I mean, you're so right, Jamal, bringing in Liz Cheney. Nobody's going to be excited about that, Right. It's just going to give us nightmares about her dad, shooting you in the woods or something. It's bad. But you bring in people like RFK and Tulsi Gabbard and Elon Musk, people that are exciting and interesting people. It garners interest. Whereas the Kamala Harris campaign brought in just tired old celebrities who say the same things every single time, and they have basically no political knowledge whatsoever. So terrible campaign. Trump was a much better campaigner, as you rightly point out. His numbers with Hispanic and African American male voters, especially, were tremendous. So he connected with a lot of people.
That's an understatement. Yeah, I agree with you. And you're absolutely right. I was looking for this clip um, of, oh, I think this is it. Okay, right here. Just to back you up on what you were saying here. This is Chuck
Already
Schumer.
won a large percentage of those people over. On the other hand, Trump is so new that for every, this is the second point, for every blue-collar Democrat we will lose in Western PA, we will pick up 2, 3 moderate Republicans in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And you can repeat that in Ohio and Illinois.
That didn't work. That didn't work. But it gets across like that was their idea. As you pointed out, it used to be the party of the working man. Well, this is the party of the working class, whether you agree with them or not. They were, at the very least, that was their point of view and their perspective. And somewhere in the 80s, maybe around Jimmy Carter, definitely during Bill Clinton, they went with this notion that we are sick of the left. We are sick of having to deal with stuff like trying to get healthcare, education, Social Security. And so if we can switch our coalition to moderate Republicans, in this case, let's go with Liz Cheney. And now we have ability to see if we can get these moderate Republicans that Donald Trump alienated. Meaning Kamala Harris didn't end up with Liz Cheney by an accident. This was Democratic policy as espoused by Chuck Schumer to effectively disempower the working class in order to go for these kind of upper echelon Republicans. And by the way, they did get those upper echelon. If you look at the exit polls, higher incomes, higher degrees went to Democrats. They just couldn't replace the working class.
Well, they discovered that there's money there. You know, I mean, what the Democratic Party officials noticed is that there's a hell of a lot of money going to the military-industrial complex. If you tie in with that, you're fine. They're fine with the wars because the wars bring in tons of money. The same is true with the pro-Israel lobby. They will finance your campaign. AIPAC, it does not discriminate, right? If you do their bidding, they will finance your campaign to the teeth. And so they realize that. So screw the working class. What have they done for us lately? You know, go back to your jobs and leave us alone. We've got a country to run, you know. And so I think that's a lot of the Trump vote. People just, they felt so alienated by this party that hates their guts. It hates working people's guts.
Yep. And simultaneously believes that those working people owe them their vote either way. It's pretty astonishing.
Or if you don't vote for him, you ain't black.
Right. You should see. I've been fascinated by what's been on MSNBC. They have been attacking people left and right. Joanne Reed was like, "You Hispanics that voted for Trump, when your family members get deported, you own it." Roland Martin has been attacking Muslims and Arabs because they didn't vote for Kamala Harris. Like, these people have lost their minds, as opposed to putting it where it belongs, on the candidate. It is your candidate's job to get those votes. And for whatever reason, Democratic Party is the only party that believes people owe them their votes. It's the weirdest thing in the world to me. I want to go to Trump's people, right? Trump, who came in saying, "I'm going to end wars, not start them." And names started trickling out in regards to who he was bringing to his administration. He said, "Hey, don't worry, I'm not bringing in Pompeo and Nikki Haley." People's like, "Thank you." He's not bringing in Pompeo and Nikki Haley. And then he brings in one lunatic after the next that is just as neoconish as they are. So Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, they're saying Michael Rubio for Secretary of State. That apparently has not been confirmed. And Tulsi Gabbard is apparently agitating to try to get that position so Rubio doesn't get it. So we'll see how that goes. Elise Stefanik, UN ambassador. Again, all of these people, with the exception of maybe Tulsi Gabbard, are neocons on the issue, especially on Israel. Pro-war is an understatement. Marco Rubio made this argument to Code Pink. Basically, I don't care how many women and children get killed. I'm just going to blame Hamas for it. So, you know, my conscience is clear. It's just astonishing stuff. Here's the other one. Susie Wiles, she's going to head his campaign team. I don't really have any feelings about that. And then you get to Daniel Ratcliffe, who they're calling head of the CIA. Ratcliffe is interesting because Ratcliffe is a heavy UFO guy. And he was one of the people who was exposing the Trump and Russia thing being a fraud. Basically, this is nonsense. Also, this guy, Pete Hegseth. And just to give the audience a taste of him, let's play this clip of him to let the audience see who, okay, right here, who Trump chose for this role. Again, that is somewhat terrifying. And the idea that they're making him Secretary of Defense is disturbing.
Sometimes you have moments, Stephen. I happen to believe that we can't kick the can down the road any longer in trying to prevent Iran from getting a nuclear bomb. They used the killing of Soleimani as an excuse to say, we're scrapping the Iran deal. We all know they were scrapping it anyway. So what better time than now to say, we're starting the clock. You've got a week. You've got X amount of time before we start taking out your energy production facilities. We take out key infrastructure. We take out your missile sites. We take out nuclear development. We take out.
That's terrifying. Like, that guy's a lunatic. And for one, like, how do you plan on doing that? So what? You're going to run bombing campaigns on Iran? And I would imagine he's working with Israel in order to do these bombing campaigns. Because look, this is what Netanyahu wanted, right? The U.S. to be functionally involved in this kind of hot war with Iran. Iran has already said that they're going to hit Israel. They are very clear. True Promise 3, they keep saying it's coming, it's coming, it's going to happen. Also, the other complication is that Iran and Russia are signing a mutual security agreement that will be out soon, and we don't even know what's in it. But at the very least, if it's a security agreement, Russia is going to be helping Iran to the hilt, and it's going to basically deal with any kind of existential crisis that goes in against Iran. If this lunatic and Trump are deciding we are going to have another pressure campaign against Iran, all hell is going to break loose in the Middle East. That guy's terrifying to me. Give me your take on this. Trump said he's going to end wars. How the hell is he picking these neocons that effectively going to start potentially their third world war?
That's like I'm saying, hey, Jamal, I'm going to stop drinking. Let's go to the bar, man. Right? I mean,
Right.
It makes no sense. You know, a couple of things. I've been told by someone who knows, for what it's worth, that he does pick people that he thinks are good on TV. And this guy, Hegseth, is a television. He's a Fox TV news commentator. Now, he was in the military. That's true. He started an organization called Vets for Freedom that actually in the late 2000s, the late aughts, they were lobbying Congress for us to stay in Iraq and stay in Afghanistan. That was their thing. And here you have Trump, who said those were stupid wars we never should have been in. The guy he hires to run the Pentagon was lobbying for us to stay in there forever. He was completely against us getting out of Afghanistan, something that Trump wanted to do desperately in the very last days of his administration. Now, if you go to someone like Mike Waltz, the interesting thing, we bring up Liz Cheney and the Cheneys, who went against Trump and was supposedly the secret, they were going to be the secret weapon that dethrones Trump. Well, Mike Waltz worked for Dick Cheney. He worked for Donald Rumsfeld. He was in that world. He was in the Bush neocon world. That's where he comes from. So these people are, I mean, and I was thinking about this earlier. You know, Donald Trump is very talented as an entertainer. That's really what he's known for. And to me, it almost seems like he's putting together his entertainment show. In his mind, it's almost like he goes to AI. Hey, give me a tough-looking defense secretary. That's what I want. So the dude's got tattoos everywhere. He keeps healthy. There's that guy. Okay, let me see. I need some rodeo clowns. So let's do a Office of Government Efficiency and do people that have, like the rodeo clowns that run around and the bulls could easily kill them, but they just kind of outrun the bulls. So these guys have no power. I need a court jester. So you get Marco Rubio, who everyone knows is not very smart. So you have your court jester. I mean, he's like sort of filling these roles with his idea of what a good TV show would look like, a TV show about the presidency, and it's it would be funny if it wasn't terrifying, because as you point out, people like Hegseth has some very, very terrifying views. I don't care what people have for their personal religion or if they have no religion, but when you bring in a religion that encourages the end of the world, that encourages the apocalypse, because you feel like it somehow fulfills your personal views, That's a big problem. That separation
Dig
of
into
church and
that for
state.
me, because the audience may not know what you mean on that. This is him wanting to build a mound in Jerusalem in order to bring back Jesus or something like that, right? Is that what you mean?
Yes, that's a central tenet of Christian Zionism, which he follows extensively. Anyone could go on Twitter X and look at a few things. Michael Tracy, for example, who I think is an exceptional researcher and journalist, he's put out several clips of things that Hegseth has been saying that are terrifying. Again, I don't care what your religion is, if you have one or if you don't, but when you bring that to the public, and you're encouraging the destruction of the world because you think that somehow you'll be risen up to heaven. By the way, all the Jews get killed who don't convert at the end, so it doesn't end well for them. Yeah, I'm sure they're laughing about this because they think it's goofy, but they're going to let this guy, support them. This is a terrifying thing. And then, by the way, sorry to interrupt you, Jamal, but then one thing we forgot is Mike Huckabee. He's the guy who says Palestinians do not exist. There's no such thing. He's going to be Trump's ambassador to Israel. So how much do we think that he's going to be a fair broker here? Stop killing Palestinian people. Are you kidding? They don't even exist. Make sure that they don't exist. Finish them.
I mean, but is there that big of a difference between psychopaths or sociopaths that Joe Biden have in his admin? John Kirby, Matthew Miller. Matthew Miller is particularly disgusting and has defended pretty much everything. Patel, Anthony Blinken, Hashtin, the one that was an IDF soldier that they sent in order to be the envoy for Lebanon. Think about that for the moment. Like, Israel is slaughtering the Lebanese women and children hand over fist. And Joe Biden is like, yeah, I'm going to send somebody who used to be an IDF soldier to be the envoy for that same Lebanon. So it's like, as bad as these people are they really that much worse than Blinken, who goes into the Middle East and say, I am a Jew, as one of his first proclamations when he gets there, basically telling everybody where his standing is, and it damn sure wasn't going to be some kind of best interest of America. Like, none of these people seem to be working in the best interest of America regarding foreign policy.
Yeah, I mean, I would say Biden's people were more banal, the Hannah Arendt banality of evil. They were sort of colorless people. Now, so they brought in the clowns. Now they have the people with the tattoos who talk loud, and so you probably have a point. Who knows? I mean, my good friend Colonel Doug McGregor was on Judge Napolitano's show yesterday, and he says he believes that war is imminent. The people in the Middle East are watching what's happening. They look at how this administration is coming together, even in places like Egypt that have not been restive for a long time. They're looking at this and they're saying, this is the United States that's going to start attacking. We need to be ready for it.
Well, that's the wild part too, right? This is not the same world that Trump left. Meaning, when Trump left, he was working with the Abraham Accords. Iran was somewhat isolated. JCPOA had fallen. Well, he basically killed the JCPOA. He ended it. North Korea was somewhat isolated, even though Trump was working with them where the missiles weren't necessarily being fired into the Sea of Japan. Joe Biden gets in, all of that goes to pot. And so you have an Israel that is radically isolated from the rest of the globe, with the United States being the only country working with it. Maybe Germany, but Germany is always on the wrong side of history. So there's that. You get Iran that is no longer isolated. It's integrated into BRICS. It has a deal, or at the very least an arrangement with Saudi Arabia, where they're not at each other's throats. And the countries that Trump was working with prior, they are not interested in this kind of Middle Eastern war with Iran. So this pressure strategy, I don't know how that's going to work without the other countries in that region assisting him in that pressure strategy. If anything, those countries are against Israel. One last point. They went to the Arab Muslim conference, and one of the speeches, and many of the speeches, were effectively like, something needs to be done. We can't allow Israel to continue to do this. Bashar al-Assad even went out and effectively said, we have the will, or we have the capability to do it. We don't have the will to do it. We need to start, basically get the will to use our powers in order to change the context of the situation on the ground. Do you think they're going to do it, though? I mean, that's the rub. I've heard Colonel McGregor talk about this, where he's mentioned Turkey and everything else. I don't believe Turkey is going to get involved like that, especially if the other countries don't also get involved. But what's your take on this? Do you think there's a level of blood that they say this is too much? Or for that matter, if Trump comes in with this kind of Bigfoot approach to go after Iran, do you think they would say, no, this is too much? I guess I'm asking, is there a level of subservience that the Arab countries or Muslim countries just won't accept?
Yeah, you have to wonder in places like Jordan that have been, as you point out, the purple word is subservient, absolutely. But you have a population that's largely Palestinian that is not obviously not happy with what's happening. At what point does that get unstable, and can the U.S. glue Humpty Dumpty together again if it does get unstable? You know, so you have, I mean, look, you're asking about the unity in that world. Why do you think they had to kill Gaddafi? You know, because that's what he was all about. You know, why do you think they had to try to regime change Assad? Because that's what he was all about. If you, as soon as you, and it goes back through, you know, through history, anyone who tries to unite the Arabs and the other Muslims in the Middle East finds themselves at the receiving end of a U.S. bullet or knife in that case. God. Anyway. Yeah, so there's a danger, but I think there is a point where that's going to happen. But there's also one other thing, Jamal, that we have to think about, which is U.S. capabilities. Now, we're speaking loudly, but our big stick, I'm sorry, we've given it all to Ukraine. We've given it all to Israel. We can't build missiles anymore. We do not have a military. We don't have a proper military industrial complex. All we have is a bunch of lobbyists, you know, who steal money. We don't make good weapons anymore. We've seen that in the battlefields of Ukraine. So even if they wanted to, they may have a will, but they probably don't have a way. And we're broke, by the way, so we can't start making stuff.
Well, see, that's the other terrifying part, right? Like I always say, trying to win a drawing game is the fastest way to lose it. And not accepting a loss sometimes make it that much more catastrophic. I mean, I would argue Ukraine is that way. It's like you have these big ideas without the capability of affecting those big ideas. It's like your, you know, it's what do you say, your reach exceeds your grasp in a certain way. My fear is that happens also with neocons coming in, because neocons don't care, right? They don't care about the budget. They don't care that these things are kind of outlandish. They are often willing to go through these military projects. I would argue Netanyahu and what he's doing in Israel. Yeah, you're killing a lot of people, but you're still fighting in Gaza after a year. You're still fighting in southern Lebanon and apparently taking heavy losses in southern Lebanon. You're getting hit from Yemen, of all places, despite the fact that Yemen has been bombed for the last 10, 15 years. Like, meaning, and Iran has shown that it can cut through your air defense like butter. So you are, despite the fact that you are vulnerable and known to be vulnerable, you continue on with this kind of genocidal campaign, neocons. And so my fear is that regardless of what Trump has said, he doesn't get the deal that he wants in Russia, meaning any deal that he gets for Russia has to be on Russian terms because, again, they have the whip hand. And unless you're willing to go to nuclear weapons to change the context of that, you're stuck with what you got. And the same thing with Iran. I don't have this belief that the U.S. is going to be able to dominate Iran in the way that they're having this conversation about dominating Iran. I just don't buy it. I get the sense that this is going to be like another Ukraine, where they're like, oh, we're going to destroy the Russian economy. Oh, we're going to destroy the Russian military. And you find out after 3 years, okay, that didn't happen. I could be wrong. I could totally be wrong. And as you pointed out, with $35 trillion in debt. So how does that work?
Yeah, the perfect embodiment of the neocon philosophy and world outlook is when Karl Rove said, when we act, we create our own realities. And they truly believe that. You know, the world is on fire all around them. And they believe, I mean, they're served a pile of feces and they believe that it's delicious dessert. You know, they literally believe that they create reality in their minds. And it's always turned out badly. And I don't know why they keep getting new chances.
But that's the wild part. When Donald Trump was having a conversation with Tucker Carlson, he explicitly spent like an hour talking about how these wars haven't served us. They're wasting out $10 million or $10 billion. We don't get anything out of it. Like, eventually we leave the country empty-handed with nothing but debt and dead people. And then to go a week later and fill his administration with people like this. Is it fair to say that this is a betrayal of his base, of America broadly, and effectively on this issue, he is fundamentally lied? Or is it too soon to come up with that assessment? From my point of view, people of policy.
Well, I would do two things. One, be more serious. One, be a little more lighthearted. The serious one is that he was funded by Miriam Adelson And you get a lot of money you get a lot of action for $100 million. Hell, I'd hire some neocons if someone gave me $100 million. You know. And the other thing is that, this is the Trump reality show too. I mean, he's got all these clowns running around talking about war, and he's the guy in the middle saying, you're fired, get out of here. Like he did with Bolton. That guy's a nut job. This guy's an idiot. This guy's a moron. So it's sort of, I mean, in a way, you can't blame him. He's putting out entertainment for a dumbed down America that thrives on entertainment. We are idiocracy right now, and he's the perfect fit for that.
Yeah, it's dumbed down up until the point where these guys have to make a decision on war and peace. Which is a clown show up until that point, from my point of view. He's such a wild card. I don't know. It's hard for me to figure out what Trump is going to do. But to be fair, I had no idea what Kamala Harris was going to do either. Like, she was a blank slate on the issue of foreign policy. So it's like there was no way to really go. It's like anywhere you went to, you were kind of burned or kind of in the dark on what that stuff looked like. But these picks are terrifying to me. And I really hope the Marco Rubio thing is wrong. I hope he adds in Tulsi Gabbard as Secretary of Defense. Secretary of Defense is not supposed to be a bellicose maniac. It's actually supposed to be a State Department that is trying to bring hostilities down. Gabbard or even RFK would be a better steward for that position than Marco Rubio, but we will see. Rubio is just another blanket from my point of view. Daniel, I'm going to give you the last word before we close it.
Well, I hope you're right on Rubio and Tulsi. Tulsi is not perfect, but she also could stand up to the others. She's a military person. She understands that world. And let's hope that would be one bright spot. I agree with you 1,000%.
Yeah. Daniel McAdams. He is Executive Director of the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity. You can learn more about Daniel's work at the Ron Paul Institute for Peace and Prosperity by going to ronpaulinstitute.org. Daniel, if McGregor is ever open to coming on to the show, I would love to have him. I've followed him for a very long time. The man is brilliant. As a historian, as a military mind, I've always appreciated his conversation on this stuff. He has been one of those strong anti-war voices and critics of this kind of, orthodoxy that we've gone with. Also, he knows Trump, and he's pointed out that despite all of this, that Donald Trump has a bias towards not having war. But I got to be honest, the people that Donald Trump has chosen, it does not give me that sense. But I could be wrong. I could be absolutely wrong. Man, thank you for this. I really appreciate you joining me.
Thanks, Jamal. Take care.
All right. I am going to take a quick break. If you guys dig the content, give it a like, share the content, subscribe to the content. We have a damn good crowd today. Definitely hit the notification bell. Also, I do shows all times of the day, so definitely hit the notification bell to get a notice when I am here. I have one more guest that is coming, Avi Loeb. So today at, I think, 11 o'clock, there's going to be UFO testimony in Congress. And there's going to be a UFO hearing that is supposed to be somewhat historic. We've had a few of those UFO hearings, but on this one, there are going to be witnesses that are coming to testify, including Lou Elizondo. Elizondo has just written his book on the UFO issue, and I would imagine he is going to give, I guess, a little bit more testimony than he's given in the past. All of this is going to go into congressional record, and apparently they're going to be exposing something. The wild part is, though, FOIA requests that have went out have brought back some fascinating information on things that the pilots and the Navy have been running into. And that stuff was buried. Much of the FOIA request was redacted, but it became clear that pilots were continuously running into something that was having these flight characteristics that A, was abnormal, and B, blew our planes and capabilities out of the water. Some of these things were glowing orbs that were flying around the aircraft. Some of these things were coming out of the water. And even with the Nimitz engagement, I only need one. And the Nimitz would be the one that I would point to, where you had radar, you had a ship, radar picks it up, 2 aircraft go in order to see it. David Fravor and Dietrich, 2 pilots, 2 different airplanes. Both of these planes have wingmen. Both of them see this object, seem like it's coming out of the water. Fravor is watching this for several minutes. He tries to go in on it in a split second. It goes and ends up at the eagle's nest, basically the place that they were supposed to go in case of emergency. It's there within a split second. And it blows him away. He's stunned by the whole thing. He can't process it. He's never seen anything like it. Fravor was one of the pilots that were flying on 9/11. So from the standpoint of impeachability, he is that guy. Now, under the Hillary Clinton, when she was running, Clinton wanted people to ask her about the UFO issue, even to the point where you can see it in the Clinton emails where she is asking Jimmy Kimmel to say, hey, give me information, basically ask me a question on UFOs, in which case she answered it, and they were ebullient over the way she answered the question, meaning it's something that she wanted. There was a rumor that what Clinton wanted to do was effectively open the UFO files. Now, Trump is going in. Trump has basically said, I'm going to open up the JFK files. I'm going to open up the Epstein files. I'm going to open up all of the files. Whether he does it or not, who knows? But the people that he's putting into those positions, John Ratcliffe, for example, a big UFO guy, Marco Rubio, a big UFO guy. So I don't know what it means in the context of the UFO area, but from the standpoint of, yeah, I don't know what it means. I don't know how far Trump is going to be willing to go with it. But I want to bring in my guests. Avi Loeb. I am a pleasure to have you. Professor Avi Loeb received his PhD in plasma physics at the age of 24 from Hebrew University in Jerusalem and was subsequently a long-term member of the Institute of Advanced Study in Princeton, where he started to work in theoretical astrophysics. In 1993, he moved to Harvard University, where he is tenured. 3 years later, he is now Frank B. Baird Jr., Professor of Science and former chair of the department. Avi, man, Professor, thank you for joining me. I really appreciate you joining me.
Thanks for having me. It's a great pleasure.
So I read your article on the Galileo Project. And just for the audience, please tell them what the Galileo Project is, just so to give them a primer on what that is.
Right. So over the past 70 years, there were reports about unusual objects near Earth. Initially, they were called UFOs, unidentified flying objects. Now they're called UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena. But at any event, these are objects that people who witnessed them could not figure out what they are. And they looked unusual, not human-made, not natural. And of course, the big change came when the Director of National Intelligence reported to the US Congress 3 years ago that indeed the military personnel are seeing those objects. And there was an office in the Pentagon established to look into these reports a couple of years ago. And they concluded that they can tell 97% of the objects as being mundane objects like balloons, drones, but 3% they cannot figure out. And the problem is they are looking at past data, data that was collected but is incomplete. And when the first report from the Director of National Intelligence, Avril Haines, came out, I decided to lead the Galileo project, which is, instead of asking the government to tell us what's in the sky and whether there is anything from outside the solar system, that's not their day job. Their day job is national security. And of course, it could be objects that were manufactured by adversarial nations. So indeed, they need to figure it out, but they are happy if they identify 97% of those objects. For a scientist like myself, even if 1 in a million came from outside the solar system, that would be the biggest scientific news that we can deliver to humanity, that we are not alone, there is someone else out there. Maybe it's a Voyager-like craft or some technology that is far more sophisticated than we currently possess. So to figure out this, instead of relying on government, which is a bureaucratic organization that is not really scientific in its nature, I decided to build an observatory that will monitor the sky 24/7. And the first one was built at Harvard University. It took us 3.5 years to do that. And now, over the past half a year, it has been collecting data. So in the first 5 months, we got 500,000 objects in the sky. Wow. We used machine learning software, analyzed the data, and we report about the results publicly in the scientific paper that we posted last night. So this paper is available. Anyone can look at it. It's on the Galileo website. I wrote an essay in medium.com. If you just search for Avi Loeb at medium.com, you can see all the details with the links. And the point is that, we will release the data, make it public. We are not signed to any non-disclosure agreements, and the sky is not classified. That's the fundamental point. So why would the public, who is very curious about this question of whether we are alone or not, why should we rely on government officials, on journalists to reveal the truth? I mean, these are the wrong targets for us to ask these questions. It should be scientists that give the public the information. And it's really the first time that a systematic survey of the sky for, more than half a year by now was done with scientific instruments that were calibrated. It's a lot of work. It's much easier for people to express opinions, either to debunk past reports or to say, we believe. I mean, there are lots of people who believe as if it's a religion. It's not a religion. If there are objects in the sky that we don't understand, we can figure them out by collecting data.
Scientific investigation. That's kind of the point, right? There's a problem. There's a big question. We need to answer the question. This is not an ideological issue. There seems to be something that people are encountering. We need to figure out what it is.
Exactly.
There's a saying where there was an airplane, and as the airplane was flying, it encountered a UFO. And all of the people, or most of the people on the airplane went to see the UFO. And when it landed, people were talking about the UFO, and then they got to a scientist and they said, "Did you see it?" He says, "I don't believe a UFO, so I didn't look." I find that to be somewhat outlandish.
That's the problem. Okay. So the definition of a scientist, I mean, a good scientist is someone who is curious, open-minded, and willing to be guided by data, by evidence, rather than by prejudice. Unfortunately, most practicing scientists do not subscribe to this club. They know the answer in advance. They will dismiss it. Obviously in the sky, it's a mixed bag. You have plenty of balloons, drones, airplanes. But the question is, 1 in a million, 1 in a billion of the objects might be really unusual. So we should just check the data and figure it out. But instead, scientists are not doing that. That's my problem, that a question that is either important for national security or important for knowing our place in the universe. This is the most important thing.
Well, that's the wild part, because the reality of it is, it's one thing when the government does a report and says, well, we don't see anything. There's nothing out here. This is swamp gas, etc. And scientists can lump in and say, see, there's nothing out there. There's nothing. There's no point in doing this. It's a different animal, though, when the government comes out and says, yes, we've been encountering something, not just encountering something. Our planes have had to divert because we've been encountering something. I mean, the FOIA requests that have been coming out that apparently they're going to be talking about at the hearing are just astonishing. I mean, you're talking about pilots that have to, emergency maneuvers in order to avoid hitting something that they don't know what it is. And then the flight characteristics that is being reported apparently blow the planes out of the water. In some cases, these things are transmedium, where they're going underwater and then coming out the water, going at fantastic speeds. And again, you're going to have people coming out saying, we've been doing crash retrievals, that they're bringing out bodies. All of these people are now putting this into the congressional record, even with pictures and images. And what they point out is, we have pictures and images. They just don't show them. Lou Elizondo, when I had the interview with him, he pointed out, well, yeah, he says when they were talking to Congress members, there were things that they were showing that they couldn't show the American public, which is the reason why Christian Gillibrand, Marco Rubio, Gallego, all of these people got so adamant about, we need to figure out what this is. This seems to be a real thing.
I mean, if you think about it, there are only two possibilities. Either it's equipment from adversarial nations, and what they retrieved from crash sites are pieces of equipment that is superior to what the U.S. is producing, and then they want to avoid.
Actually, that's hard to kind of reconcile.
It's hard to understand, but the point is, in that case, DOD, the Department of Defense, is trying to hide it just because they don't want to show the weakness of the U.S. in developing technologies. I mean, that by itself is inappropriate because Congress needs to know if there are the technologies that the US needs to catch up with. We need to know about it so that we can catch up with. And the second possibility is that they don't understand it. They gave it to some corporations. And you know that these corporations are just like psychologists. You come with a problem to a psychologist, and of course the psychologist will not solve it. Why? Because you keep paying as long as the treatment goes. So they will never resolve it as long as Department of Defense is willing to pay them to look into it. And so that is really not what the public wants. I mean, you want to have the best minds in the world, scientists looking into it and helping government figure it out. And otherwise, it's embarrassing that they haven't figured out these things for decades. And I'm here to help them. You know, I'm happy. I was actually contacted by the oversight committee staff. They asked me if I'm willing to be on this hearing, and I said yes. And only at the last moment they decided not to invite me. Perhaps because they didn't want the discussion to be too scientific. It's more about pressuring government agencies.
But it should be both. Right.
I agree. I mean, I completely agree. You know, I wrote my testimony. I cleared my schedule for today, but at the end they decided not to invite me. What can I say?
That's unfortunate, because the reality of it is you need scientific heft in order to make it work. Meaning, it's one thing for somebody to give testimony. It's another thing for scientists to come in and say, look, we have been doing this research. We've been looking into the air. We've been doing these critical studies. I'm curious, is there a method that can diversify the capability of information collection? So for example, when you say you created an observatory, is there a inexpensive way to allow other people to put that on their roof, put it on their window? Like just some way where you can basically spread this out to anybody that want to use it, kind of like where machines would use other people's computers in a network in order to leverage those machines when they're not in use.
Yeah, so the observatory we constructed and designed, by the way, from scratch, because astronomical observatories are looking at a small portion of the sky. We have to look at the entire sky all the time. And usually astronomers ignore things flying overhead. We focus on them. So we had to do it from scratch. We have a design that is working. It took us a while to design it, put it together and operate it and then analyze the data. So now we know exactly, we have the recipe, we made the cake. The cake is tasty. Okay, so it's working. And now we are planning to make 2 copies. We were funded for 2 additional copies of this. Now, it costs about $1 million to build such an observatory, but it could be cheaper for a mobile version. I mean, we can make a mobile version that is a fraction of this cost. And, you know, in principle, the more such observatories are looking at the sky, the better, because you never know whether you are at the right place at the right time. So at the moment, it's just limited by funding. If someone comes forward, you know, the scientific projects are funded at tens of millions to hundreds of millions to billions by NASA. Okay. And if I were to receive hundreds of millions of dollars, I can make, tens of these observatories, maybe even more, hundreds of these observatories. And we can get to the bottom of the question of whether there is anything unusual going on. Because
have you lobbied for this, by the way, like to get government funding, or do we even want government funding? I mean,
I mean, it could be private funding, it could be government, as long as no strings are attached, as long as this is not a branch of the intelligence agencies that are monitoring the sky. I mean, so as long as the data can be analyzed scientifically, released to the public, the way science is done, there are lots of projects that the federal agencies are funding, including the Department of Defense, to figure out the Department of Energy funds a project, that cost tens of millions of dollars to figure out the dark energy, what is causing the cosmic acceleration. That's of no practical use. They're doing it. Now, I'm talking about a project that could help them in terms of national security, but could also be the most important discovery in science, which is to say, if there is one object in 1 million or 1 billion that is from extraterrestrial origin, that would be huge. And if the Department of Energy would put it as a priority, and then I should be able to get hundreds of millions to do it, and we will get to the bottom of it within a few years. It's not so difficult. But it could also be funded privately. And I should say also that we went for an ocean expedition to the site of the first reported interstellar meteor that was detected by U.S. government satellites in about a decade ago. And we are planning to go again.
I remember you were on the boat for that. How did that turn out? I thank you for reminding me on that one.
Yeah.
What was the result of that, by the way?
So I was definitely on the boat. It was June 14 to 28, 2023. And we collected materials, molten droplets that came from the meteor, about 850 of them, each of them less than the size of a grain of sand, less than a millimeter. And we studied them in the laboratory. We published a paper a couple of months ago where we showed that the material composition of 10% of those spherules looks different than solar system materials. But we cannot figure out the nature of the object. We want to find bigger pieces. And we wish to do that with a robot, a remotely operated vehicle that we will put on the ocean floor and then collect pieces from the wreckage of this meteor. We know exactly where to go. It will cost $6.5 million. And we are currently seeking a funder. We have a ship. Everything is ready. We just need the funds, $6.5 million. So if anyone is listening and knows someone who is willing to contribute that, we will go there in summer 2025, and we can involve that person and show that person the materials we find and the information before we release it to anyone else.
Is this also under the Galileo project, or is this a different project?
Well, okay. It's under the Galileo project. It's another approach to studying objects that came from outside the solar system. Instead of just looking for objects maneuvering in the sky, you look for interstellar meteors. These are objects that collided with Earth and came from outside the solar system. How do we know that? It's because the object from 2014 was moving faster than the speed needed to escape from the solar system. It was moving actually faster than 95% of the stars outside the solar system. So it was really fast. And just from its speed, that was recorded from the fireball that it produced, but it was recorded by US government sensors on satellites. And from that, we can definitely tell that it's interstellar in origin. And the US Space Command confirmed that in an official letter to NASA in 2022. So these are the type of objects we know came from outside the solar system. And maybe among the rocks, asteroids, there might be, a Tesla Roadster car like Elon Musk launched in 2018, or a Voyager-like meteor. That's what we are looking for.
What's wild about it, you pointed out that finding like 1 in a million. And I always say, I only need one to prove the point, right? I don't need 20 different objects.
Exactly. It's just like getting married. You just need one partner to get married, right?
So proves the concept. Like, for example, the Nimitz. For me, if I needed to point the finger at one particular thing that people would pay attention to, the Nimitz is it. I mean, you had pilots who saw it. Dietrich Fravor was flying on 9/11. He gives his testimony about it. There's images clearly about it, and even radar images associated with it. People that were on the boat, like all of these people saw it. Computers were able to record it. And to your point, you pointed out it's one of the biggest. It would be a paradigm shift on so many levels. I mean, for one, it would show, okay, something in our physics is missing. There's that. It would show a new way of doing something, maybe potentially using gravity as a means of propulsion, or using something as a means of propulsion that doesn't throw stuff out the back of a ship in the way that we understand it. Like, all of this stuff is paradigm breaking, where the things that your world allowed before are now different fundamentally than the things that it allowed after. That is mind blowing.
Yeah, and the only way for us to learn something new is by collecting data, looking at the evidence. And
Yeah.
it cannot be, testimonies of people who claim they saw something, because we know from car accidents, when people are involved, each person reports about a different experience. So humans are not really reliable detectors. But on the other hand, if you have instruments monitoring the sky all the time, we can get to the bottom of it. It's just like the approach of FIFA, the Soccer World Organization. When there is a dispute about a goal, they use cameras to figure out what really happened. They don't
Right
go around
there.
and ask people.
But see, the government is hiding the ball on that stuff because it seems very clearly that technology has been picking this stuff up. Like, meaning whatever technology they're using in those airplanes, on those boats, those radars, it is picking it up. And instead, the US government is like, well, these are state secrets. Like, we can't show you because we can't show you the devices and the capabilities of the devices. So sorry, unless you have a clearance, you can't see
By
it.
the way,
And so,
so the fundamental question is why if they are hiding, why are they hiding? And of course, one possible reason that for current data, recent data, they don't want adversarial nations to be aware of the sensors that the US
That's the
government
other
is using,
part.
which are classified. Now, if you go back in time, it may be they're worried about being embarrassed because, it will show that we don't know. I mean, that was actually exposed when the Chinese spy balloon was noticed. It became clear that the US government is not really monitoring the sky well enough to see a huge balloon that you could see from a distance. And you could see from the ground, and citizens saw it, and therefore they couldn't deny it. So they might be embarrassed to admit that they are unable to figure out those things. That's the second possible reason. And the third one is the idea that maybe they are trying to reverse engineer technologies that humans do not possess. And I don't know which version is the correct one, but the fundamental question is, do they have materials? Do they have information that I could help them figure out?
Right. Well, do you think that the countries are working in tandem on this issue more than we realize?
I don't
Because
think.
it's a little bit
I
weird.
find it hard to believe that the U.S. cooperates with the Russians, with the Chinese, secretly on such matters.
But the reason I say that is because what stops the Russians from coming out with the information? Soviet Union clearly had a project looking into stuff like this. Russia, I would imagine, also have a project looking into stuff like
But
this.
you have to understand that there are obviously retrieval and reverse engineering programs for every nation because there are airplanes crashing. There are spy balloons crashing. There are technological objects that are crashing in their territories because they're spying on them. And so they want to have these programs that retrieve whatever is found in crash sites and figure out. And then when people say, oh, there might be biologics, that's what David Grush was saying. The question is, are these biologics, human remains, or are they something different than you? Because you would expect in crash sites, if you have a spying craft that used to have humans, now they are automated, so maybe not. But maybe the biologics belong to humans, and you can't really recognize what is in the wreckage because the person was completely burned up or something. But at any event, the distinction should be between things that we can associate with humans and things that we cannot associate with them. So it's not obvious to me that there are things we cannot associate with humans. And it's definitely obvious that all nations have retrieval and reverse engineering programs of craft, because that's the only way to learn what the Russians are doing. If you retrieve any aircraft that they manage to crash on your property, you will learn how to combat such an airplane and what kind of weaknesses the electronics have. So obviously every nation should have that and has that, but I don't think they cooperate on information about something beyond Earth. That is hard for me to believe.
Deeply frustrating because the reality of it is the government is effectively saying there's something in our skies. We don't know what it is. It has amazing flight characteristics. It has the ability to go through water and air. We may have biologic, depending upon the people you're listening to. However, we can't show you anything about it.
Yeah.
It's like, how the hell does that work?
So the thing I don't understand at all is those whistleblowers, that are saying this is the most important discovery since the beginning of science, yet we don't want to go to jail, and therefore we will not tell you the truth. I mean, how does that make any sense to you? I mean, it doesn't sound right to me, like saying, sorry, I cannot tell you that because I have to go on vacation right now. I mean, this is not,
would you really want to go
makes
to
no
jail?
sense. What?
Would you really want to go to jail to expose?
Yeah,
the secret?
I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever if it was real. The only sense I can make is people who say that are not really sincere or serious. They have a hidden agenda, and they are trying to introduce some misinformation just to, muddy the waters for some reason. For example, I mean, one possible reason is, suppose the US is developing new technologies, okay? They don't want adversarial nations to know about it. So if a citizen happens to see something unusual in the sky, the citizen will not be aware of these technologies, and you want to create a situation where if it's reported, you basically make it a laughing stock, and people say, oh yeah, of course, extraterrestrials, makes no sense. And nobody would take, if people were to say, oh yeah, it's US technologies of the future, then obviously that would trigger interest from other nations. So to create such a noise in the system, they want to introduce misinformation and to basically have a subject matter like extraterrestrials or interstellar objects that would be scrutinized and debunked and considered to be, just a laughing stock. And so they can do it by paying people to introduce nonsense into the conversation.
Now, I can accept that with one exception. The DNI report, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence report, explicitly said, we are trying to avoid that, and we're trying to get rid of that sentiment. Mm-hmm. Now, there could be factions, but that report was very clear. It says, the giggle factor associated with this is making information collection difficult. We need to remove the stigma associated with it so more people can come forward and discuss and talk about it.
I think it's a serious matter. I think when reliable pilots talk about it, we just need to get to the bottom of it. Okay, now, if the Department of Defense really figured out that it's adversarial nations, they can have a confidential, a classified discussion with the relevant people in Congress and explain to those people that it's classified, but they figured out what it is. Instead of leaving these congressional people, at the mercy of hearings of people who don't really know what's going on.
Right.
I don't see that they did that. And so that is inappropriate. If they haven't, so to me, it sounds more like they collected data. They don't know what it means. Okay. They just, they're uncertain about it, which actually shows a weakness. If you think about it, for an intelligence agency to admit that there are things in the sky they don't understand when it's their day job to figure out any national security threat, that means that they're not doing their job, and they're admitting it. Now, how come this is not taken more seriously? Like, we need to figure it out. So there should be,
Because if you remember, some of the reporting had been that they knew that stuff exists, but it was somewhat benign. So they just kind of ignored it.
We don't know if it's we don't know if it's benign. If there are things you don't understand, and suppose they belong to adversarial nations, they may be getting intelligence on what's going on in the US that is far beyond what we know about, and you really need to figure it out. So it's a national security priority, and separate from that, there might be also the possibility that, scientifically speaking, it's groundbreaking, and that's why I am engaged in that. So my point is, government should give a higher priority to figuring out what this is, and hopefully the hearing in Congress will bring it to that point.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. What do you think is coming out of this hearing? I've been hearing, I've been hearing FOIA requests. So Schellenberg has been pointing out FOIA requests that have been talking about basically that they buried these reports of planes and ships nearly colliding with these air objects that are doing these kind of magnificent things that they don't necessarily know how they function. And that, all things being equal, that report was buried, much of it redacted, and yet the people who are basically coming to Congress today are going to be talking about it. What do you think they're going to? Do you think these hearings are productive? And if
So let's say if I imagine myself being in charge, what would I do?
Right.
I would not bring up a journalist and ask the journalist questions. Okay, that is not the way to figure
Yeah.
out the truth.
Agreed.
Okay, a journalist is just reporting about things he heard. Okay, I would go to the primary sources. Okay, so I will call the journalist, invite the journalist to a classified meeting or a confidential meeting, and ask for the name of those for the names of those who know more about it that the journalist heard from. And I would go to the primary sources. Now, if these primary sources are within government, so they cannot really speak to me, I would speak to their supervisors. If I were in Congress or if I were to handle the situation, it needs to be done in a way that initially, at least, it's outside the public's eye, because indeed it's sensitive for national security. So you need to figure out what the origin of the report is. And if it's completely fabricated, just to give you an example, then it's a waste of time for the public, because you are creating a false impression in the public. You're making it public before you actually know. I mean, it's a ridiculous approach to try and make the hearing public before you actually know what's behind it. I mean, that makes no sense. First, you go to find what's behind it. And then, if there is an issue of disclosure and you are worried about strategy of how to inform the public, so you can inform the public after knowing what it's all about in a way that is much more appropriate. So suppose you figure out what it means, and suppose it's not national security, suppose it's something else, then you devise a plan of how to let the public know. It's completely inappropriate to somehow introduce doubts and worries to the public out of a public hearing by a journalist who is not even involved in these matters, that heard from someone else. It's just a waste of time. You see what I mean? You should go to primary sources, just dig into it and figure out what it means and be more serious about it. Why should we waste our time on hearsay? Hearsay. I mean, just to give you an example, Lou Elizondo, who is one of the key witnesses, he released a few weeks ago a photograph, and then it was found to be fabricated. Now, maybe he did it sincerely. He just believed the photograph, and then it ended up being debunked. The bottom line is that it's not real, of a UFO. Now, this is pretty bad. Why is it bad? Because you're creating noise, and then it turns out to be a false alarm. So
when he headed ATIP, I mean, like the guy who headed ATIP, the one organization.
So then you start doubting his motivation, and it's just not serious. It's like kids play when someone is trying to fool another person. So, like you can waste your life chasing ghosts. That's not the right approach. The right approach is to get to the bottom of it by speaking to the relevant people. And it doesn't need to be in the public's domain. In the public domain, you do it behind the scenes first to figure out if there is any substance behind it. The other approach is what I'm doing, because I'm not related to government, and it's just to collect data on the sky. The sky is not classified. Let's just see if there is anything unusual. If indeed it's true, there are lots of objects, and the pilots are worried about them, we will see them. Okay, it's not a mystery. We will see them in our cameras. So instead of going to Congress, listening to a hearing, and then waiting for the hearing to somehow induce disclosure about things, just look at the sky. You know what it reminds me? It reminds me of people who, instead of speaking to their family members, they keep texting them on social media. So instead of meeting with them in person, I mean, my point is just do it. Just do the right thing instead of talking about it.
I really hope you get additional funding for this, because you're absolutely right. If the product can be made much more inexpensive, where regular people can somehow get their hands on something that can assist in modeling the sky. Like if it's something where, Bob, Ted, and so can pay $20 and plug whatever it is to look into the sky 24 hours a day and automatically feed information to the system, almost like a networking type thing that is somewhat inexpensive in order to do. Hell, if you could get funding where you can give inexpensive versions of those things out, maybe they're just mini cameras, maybe I don't know, but I like the idea.
That's an excellent idea. We are currently limited by funding, not by ideas. And so we just need a donor that would be willing to promote this. And it could be a government agency. I don't mind. And we can get to the bottom of it, as I said, within a matter of years. And that's what I'm trying to do. Now we will have 3 observatories by summer 2025. And we're happy to make many more.
Elon Musk, if you're listening, Avi Loeb. Avi, man, thank you for this. I really appreciate you joining me on this issue. Avi Loeb, Professor Avi Loeb, I should say. He received a PhD in plasma physics at the age of 24 from Hebrew University in Jerusalem and was subsequently a long-term member of the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, where he started to work on theoretical astrophysics. In 1993, he moved to Harvard University, where he was tenured. 3 years later, he is now Frank B. Bard Jr. Professor of Science, former chair of the department, and of course, he started the Galileo Project. Professor, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right. We have come to the end of the show. All super chats will be read. Great lineup today, Jamal. Great show. President Jafar, man, thank you. Frustrating this morning when it first started, but it got back on track. Please consider interviewing Chris Hedges while he is extant. Chris Hedges, I've interviewed him, I think, once or twice. And yeah, he's a really good speaker. He knows his stuff. Very thoughtful in the way that he talks about this stuff. So look, I've come to the end. I'm dragging ass, so I'm going to call it a day. I want to thank all of you for joining me. If you dig the content, hit like, share it, subscribe to it. If you really dig the content, you can support the work through PayPal, Patreon, or for that matter, Super Chats. We had a little bit of difficulty today, but thank you for sticking with me. We had a damn good crowd of people watching the show. Please come back Monday through Friday, 7 a.m. to 10 a.m. every day, the voice in your ear. Also, one last point. Colonel Wilkerson will be here on Monday, I believe at 9 o'clock. I need to check, but he will be here on Monday. That's Colin Powell's former chief of staff. That should be a damn good show. I want to thank all of you for your support, whether that's sharing it, whether that's hitting the like button, whether that's subscribing to the channel. We're trying to hit 40,000 by the end of the year. We can do it. We just need a little bit of gumption, continuous work, and your help. So, Jamal Thomas Show, signing off. You guys have a fantastic day. Yeah, you guys have a fantastic day. Signing off.